Hello and thank you for watching Access Asia. Coming up, amid protests against police brutality, officers in India are trying to improve their image. Still, critics say not only is excessive force commonplace, law enforcement is given relative impunity. Sending a loud message without a single word. Pro-democracy supporters in Hong Kong are finding ways to protest despite China's controversial crackdown. And the coconut milk industry in Thailand scrambles to save face and save business. It faces growing backlash after PETA accused it of using slave monkeys to pick fruit. Well, protests against police brutality are occurring in a country where excessive force is often seen as a necessary evil. But more and more people in India are challenging this status quo. It comes after the torture and murder of a father and son at the hands of police. The victims have come to be known as the George Floyds of India. Dia Gupta and Tomadeni report.
In India's capital, New Delhi, there's a police officer on every corner. Following a nationwide COVID-19 lockdown, the city's police forces took on a secondary role as community caretakers, distributing food, escorting the sick to hospitals, and even handing out protective masks.
अभी आपने बोला मुझसे बात करो मास्क नहीं लगाया लगाना चाहिए था ना आपको मैं चेकिंग के लिए रोका है आपको
Signs that say Dil Ki Police or Police of the Heart have popped up all over the capital in recent months. In a massive rebranding effort, the police are depicting themselves as humanitarian public heroes.
ये इसलिए ज़रूरी है कि पहले लोग पुलिस के पास आने में डरते थे अब हम उनको बताना चाहते हैं कि हम दिल से आपके साथ हैं
But the Indian police is still considered a violent force in the public imagination. Even Indian cinema reflects the cultural normalization of this brutal image and often depicts cops as heroic but ruthless keepers of justice. Police brutality is not limited to the big screen. It's a part of everyday life in India. These images, which went viral around the world, show officers beating those who did not respect lockdown rules. In India, even minor offences can lead to blows from a lathi, a long baton inherited from the British era. It was the force of a lathi that partially blinded this law student in New Delhi. His university was a hotspot for student protests last December and saw indiscriminate violence at the hands of the police.
और सब लोग आते हुए बिना कोई इंट्रोगेशन के, बिना किसी पूछताछ के, बिना किसी से कुछ पूछे, बिना किसी से कोई आई कार्ड मांगे उन्होंने मारना शुरू कर दिया। पहले एक स्टिक उन्होंने मेरे हाथ पे मारी, ये फ्रैक्चर हो गया था मेरा हाथ। आँख पे इतनी ज़ोर से हिट किया, वो फाइबर वाली स्टिक मुझे याद है, फाइबर वाली स्टिक के कॉर्नर से उन्होंने मुझे हिट किया पे, इतनी ज़ोर से हिट किया कि आँख से ब्लीडिंग शुरू हो गई। वो इंटेंशनली वो सारे सीसीटीवी कैमरास को टारगेट करके तोड़ रहे थे। सारे हर तरह की विटनेस को, हर तरह के एविडेंस को वो ख़त्म करना चाह रहे थे।
Over 80 students were injured during the incident in Delhi, but so far not a single police official has been charged. As a lawyer and activist for police reform, Brinda Grover believes that police brutality is commonplace and impunity is simply taken for granted in India.
The biggest problem that we are facing, we do not have an independent, professional investigating agency in this country. We are seeing this shift taking place. The right-wing government in charge in the center, and the discourse is today highly majoritarian, where minority communities, particularly the Muslims, are targeted, and we see this kind of communalization taking place in the police force also. The political class uses the police to advance their own purposes.
That political purpose, she believes, became clear this February when the national capital was shaken by sectarian riots. 72 hours of violence in a Muslim-majority neighborhood in northeast Delhi led to 53 deaths. The police were caught destroying CCTV cameras and even helping rioters collect stones. In this video, police have beaten 4 Muslim men and forced them to sing the Indian national anthem. One man later died from his injuries. These ruins are all that remain of Muhammad Salim's home, the only Muslim residence on his street. His brother was shot and burnt alive before his eyes. The police only arrived to register the complaint a day later.
तो जब मेरा भाई वहाँ पर लेने पहुँचे, जब पुलिस आई तो वहाँ सिर्फ भाई का ये इतना पैर मिला। वहाँ कुत्ते लग रहे थे, कुत्ते चारों ओर घूम रहे थे, वहाँ खींच रहे थे मेरे भाई के पैर को कुत्ते। पुलिस ने मैंने जब पूछा तो पुलिस वाला कहता है कि भाई यहाँ कहाँ है लाश वास, तू झूठ बोलता है। पुलिस वाले मेरे साथ गाली गलौज के साथ में बातें करी, कहते तू झूठ बोलता है, मुझे माँ बहन तक की गालियाँ दी हैं। कह रहे तो पैर पता नहीं किसका है किसका नहीं है। मन के भाई को मरते हुए तूने देखा या मैंने देखा? बड़ी है।
Salim even witnessed the police actively participating in the planned riots.
तो आजा, और नहीं तो पुलिस वाले जो थे ये खुद वहाँ पत्थर चलवा रहे थे। इन्होंने अपने हाथ से भी पत्थर फेंके हैं और पब्लिक को इन्होंने हाथ से पब्लिक को खुद कहा है कि मारो, हमारी तरफ से छूटे जो मर्जी करो। ये दिल्ली पुलिस खुद कह रही है इस चीज़ को, अपने मुँह से कहा है दिल्ली पुलिस। ये उनके शब्द हैं, मैंने खुद अपने कानों से सुने हैं। और दिल्ली पुलिस जिंदाबाद।
In India, not a day goes by without reports of beatings and torture at the hands of the Indian police. With voices across the world calling for an end to police brutality, Indians too are beginning to demand justice.
Recently, China imposed a new security law in Hong Kong, which makes it illegal to criticize the Chinese government. The legislation has been condemned internationally for undermining freedoms guaranteed under the One Country, Two Systems deal when Hong Kong was handed back to China by the UK in 1997. With street protests now banned, pro-democracy supporters are having to find different ways of expressing themselves. Emerald Maxwell explains.
Once upon a time, the walls of these Hong Kong restaurants were adorned with protest posters and political messages scribbled on sticky notes. Since Beijing's security law came into force on June 30th, the slogans have come down, but the pro-democracy sentiment remains, with fresh, blank post-it notes.
We don't think the sticky notes breached the national security law, so we want to keep them up to reflect the thoughts and opinions of our customers.
The blank notes are imbued with symbolism, as protesters find clever ways to get around a law which makes even peaceful demonstrations risky.
We don't need words, the protester, or we don't need words to protest. As long as we have the spirit to want the freedom.
To criticise the new security law, blank sheets of paper have also been held up by opposition lawmakers and at small protests. As well as an inability to speak out, the blank paper symbolises white terror, a Chinese phrase used to describe political persecution.
The second meaning is that we think the Hong Kong national security law is literally a blank page. Although words are written on it, the interpretation of the law is all decided by the Chinese Communist Party.
It's just the latest symbol to come out of Hong Kong's protests, from the humble umbrella in 2014 to hard hats in more recent years, as much symbols of resistance as tools of protection against a violent government crackdown. Pro-democracy advocates are now letting blank pages do the talking.
Thailand, the world's top producer of coconut milk, has been accused of using slave monkeys. The animal rights group PETA alleges that the animals are being used and abused in the harvesting of the crop. Facing growing backlash, the Thai government is rethinking how to regulate the industry.
It's an undercover investigation that's led to some of the more disturbing practices on coconut farms in Thailand. These monkeys are gathering as many as 1,000 coconuts a day, according to animal welfare group PETA. Trained in schools and a long-time popular tourist attraction, they're sent to pick the highest coconuts at the top of the trees. Coconut milk, cream, oil and meat are commonly found on supermarket shelves across the world. PETA's calling for a boycott of Thai products.
We're hoping that they're going to make those changes, eliminate the use of monkeys in coconut picking, and instead rely on mechanized coconut picking as is done in other countries. Until that happens, we're calling on consumers to not buy coconut products from Thailand.
Claims downplayed by officials.
Coconuts picked by monkeys aren't destined for export, but rather for the local market.
and the Coconut Farmers Association.
Most farmers hire pickers who use pruning shears on long poles. Macaques are used, but it's very rare.
But the group says it witnessed cruel practices on all 8 coconut farms it visited, and they were suppliers for 2 of the country's biggest exporting brands. In light of the reports, officials have so far agreed to implement a tracing system. Packaging information will aim to make clear to consumers whether the products have been sourced from monkey-free farms.
Well, due to travel restrictions amid the pandemic, many of us may have a bit of cabin fever, but 10,000 people in Taiwan entered a drawing to take a fake trip. Only 30, let's call them lucky winners, got invited to Taiwan's international airport to, get this, check in, go through security, and board a plane that would never leave the ground. Now, the government wants participants to share their stories online to spread awareness of the new airport procedures. And similar fake flight experiences will be organized in the coming week. Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.